So when it comes to our tabletop role-playing games, there's this little thing that we cover, combat. And guess what? It's not little. Combat is the overwhelming majority of the rules, especially in 5th edition. 85% of features, spells, traits, abilities, and the book itself is all about combat. So combat clearly means something to the game. But what I want to ask is, what does combat mean to you? Is combat a war, a sport, a puzzle, something else? What does combat mean to your games? Flute, lead us off.
I think for me, combat, if I were to sum it up in one of the suggestions you gave, would be sport. And I've had DMs say to me before that I really enjoy the tactics of combat, but I also enjoy like the role playing of it. And the way I look at sports is once you get to a certain point, it's not fun anymore. So like with chess, once you get to the point where you like kind of know what your opponent's going to do and how the game's going to end, it's like, why am I playing this game? It's like all like a foregone conclusion at this point once you know the game so well. That's boring to me. When I play basketball, I like trying weird shots. And in D&D, I like trying to use spells that are bad or that would like be too circumstantial. In addition to being tactical, like I like having that winning move at the right time or like moving my fighter to the right spot and protecting other people. That's fun to me, but it's not just the tactics that I enjoy, it's that sport of it and trying to use things that people don't think of, those unexpected things that make people say, whoa, that was awesome. I've never seen that spell used before. And having fun with that. That's something I really enjoy about combat.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of all those spells, that are just sitting there on the sideline, just collecting dust because, oh, they don't do a D8 of damage. What's the point? Very interesting to think about. Fred, is combat a war, sport, puzzle, or something else?
I think combat for me is a war rather than sport because sport suggests fear, and I don't really kind of approach combat like that. I mean, I have in the past because I played tabletop war games, and the idea was that both sides were in some way fairly balanced. But as you discover, game designers never do that. They do that. They say they're doing that, but they do it so that it's not that way, so that you will buy more stuff or get the other tool or whatever, or try to find the way to break the game. And then, okay, now they've figured out how to break the game by buying those tools, let's make something else so they can break the game again. So for me, I just don't see the point. I know Wizards of the Coast has been very big on the concept of combat as a sport, right back to Dungeons and Dragons 3, 3.5 was sport. 4E was very much sport. 5E is also to a large degree said sport, but they do have they've got a mixed message right now, and that is, we say we want it to be fair and balanced, but then they say, well, actually, we designed the game so that it's not actually balanced. It's like two messages. Like, which one do you pick? So for me, it's war. It's about, okay, I've got a problem. I've got an enemy. Do I need to kill them? Can I sneak past them? Is there too many that we can't actually take them on a frontal manner? Do we need to sort of deceive them or trick them, or do we need to split them up a bit? Do we need to approach it completely differently? Maybe it's we're not equipped. We need to go get some help. So I prefer it that way, and I guess it's going to be that way for me probably more and more and more as time goes by, because I find myself more drawn to just a brutal nature of combat rather than let's be gentle. Yeah, unfortunately for me. I know that sounds strange because I come from a channel that deals with a lot of rules, and people would assume that I'm all about being fair, but I'm not. I'm not really. I'm about, you got a problem, you better figure out how to deal with it. Stop looking at your character sheet because it ain't going to solve that problem. So yeah.
It turns out all is not fair in love and war. Josiah, how do you feel about combat?
Actually, I love this question because I think it's a great question. And I think that the answer to this question is yes. And that every combat that has ever been run in D&D is a mixture of all three of these things, right? And it basically just depends on which degree of each thing you're choosing to include. Because combat is, in terms of it being a sport, I think there's definitely that like challenge in what both of you guys were just talking about and how you approach that. But I think there's also like an unspoken kind of meta game sport that happens when players are in combat. Like when the wizard drops a fireball and you see like a ton of sixes show up and they're like, oh man, look at all this damage I just did. And then everyone at the table is like, damn. And that player is like, yeah, I'm winning right now. Like I just did a sick thing. So there's this kind of like competitive nature where the players are working together, but everyone wants to be like the most effective at what they're trying to do, which is ultimately good because it serves the group dynamic, but it is also kind of this competitive thing, or where the healer will like do this huge heal and everyone's like, wow, good job. And then the healer's like, yeah, know that I'm the reason you're all alive right now, you know, right? Like there's always that element to it, which I think can be very sport-like in terms of it being war-like. Yeah, Fred, like exactly like you said, you're trying to kill a thing so that it does not kill you, and that is just very much the definition of war in a lot of cases. And I think that every encounter also in its own way is kind of a puzzle. Sometimes the solution to that puzzle is stabbing the goblin in the face with your sword. Other times the solution to that puzzle, if it's a more nuanced encounter, is like, how do we use the environment to our advantage? Or how do we attack this type of creature that has a very specific strength or maybe a specific weakness, right? Like dealing with mind flayers is a great example. That is always a puzzle because mind flayers are so powerful, but they also attack intelligence, right? Like that's their big thing, which is a huge hurdle for a lot of characters. So it's figuring out, how do we circumvent that? How do we trick it into going after the wizard and not the barbarian? Like whatever, right? So I think that there's a healthy dose of all three in any encounter. I think that personally, when I design encounters, if it's an encounter that's just a random encounter, it's going to be what it's going to be. Like if we roll on a table and they get ambushed by goblins, I don't know how that's going to turn out. We'll see what happens. But when I'm designing encounters specifically, I always tend to go more of the puzzle route because I really like giving the players a combat, but also including ways within that combat to overcome it that aren't necessarily just shoot that thing until it stops moving, right? I really like giving fun environmental puzzles to figure out that the players can use to their advantage. Or sometimes the puzzle element of combat can even be figuring out how to not have combat, right? This whole idea that like combat is kind of expected to happen is a very 5th edition way of thinking, which I think is like fine. The game is built with that in mind. But in a lot of the older versions of the game, speaking from my experience in 3.5, it was all like, if you got into combat, you lost already. Like you did something wrong. Like if you were fighting something in a fair fight, something has gone wrong on your end because you either want to initiate combat in such a way where there's no chance you'll lose or that you have a huge advantage, or you want to just avoid it altogether. And I think, and I don't even mean this as like, oh, 5th edition sucks. Like 5th edition is just a lot more forgiving and like what it allows you to get away with in terms of how your abilities work and how healing works and stuff like that. So I just think overall there's less incentive to dodge combat, which is fine. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's fun when you give your players really tough fights, but give them ways to get around it outside of combat. So typically that's one of the things I'm always thinking about when I'm making encounters. So I guess my answer, to be contrarian, would be I view it as very puzzle-like.
Back in my day, the monsters had a reaction table. You would roll on it, and if they didn't always attack you all the time. When it comes to me, do I view combat as a war, sport, puzzle, or something else? It comes down to the game that I'm running, specifically the tabletop role-playing game. And more importantly, it does come down to the individual encounter. If I am running some old school stuff and you're out in the middle of the dungeon wants to kill you. It's all war, baby. You do or die. But when I'm running 5th edition, I like to spread it out a bit. I like to say, okay, if you're fighting in the magma-filled room and there's like holes popping around and the boulets like jumping around, then it's a puzzle because you have to figure out how the heck you're going to dodge the lava and dodge the boulet. And but then you also have the sport-like aspect of, oh yeah, you guys are 5th level. I'm going to throw you guys against some goblins so you can show off your new fireball and you can show off your 2 attacks, So I like having the spread And there's definitely some encounters where one gets highlighted way more than the rest. And then there is technically the times where it is a beautiful spread between the three, where there is that DPS race that you talked about, where there is that, I'm the bard and I buffed you and you only hit because of the buff. So that's my damage, not your damage kind of thing. You can definitely have that for sure. And you can also have on the side that's cool and all that we're doing this DPS race, but if we don't do this DPS race, we're going to die. So you can have all these things, and I think it just works wonderfully well. It really does come down to your individual table, your wants, your needs. And as mentioned, 5e is a game about, being a awesome person doing awesome things. So I would say try and make combats that reflect that nature. If you want something that is definitely more gritty, hardcore, go to one different game system. If you want it to be even more hardcore, awesome, like epic superhero, then do something else. So those are my suggestions.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to players doing their cool player stuff, you always see an element of that, and it's really fun. Because there's a million different ways you can build a character in D&D, right? And sometimes you have those builds. It's just like, yeah, I'm just going straight fighter, and we're doing like samurai or something. So it's like I'm just going to get progressively better at doing the thing I'm doing, and that's great. But then you'll also have people who will do these kind of janky builds where it's like, I'm going to be useless, but once we hit level 9, I'm going to be able to do all this cool stuff, how it all works together. And at my table, it's almost become a competition to see who can make the most like janky but still effective character build work. And most recently we had a character, she was doing, I think it's the Peace Domain cleric, has that warding bond ability where if someone gets damaged, you can like you can swap places or you can teleport directly to them. Mm-hmm. And they had the whole party bonded together, and they used that to their advantage in a combat where they were trying to escape, where she stabbed an NPC, which caused someone to teleport in and take the damage, and then they took damage and someone else was able to come in and take the damage for that second person and basically get all the people away from the thing they were trying to get away from by stabbing someone with a knife. And that was just so stupid, but like mechanically I was like, yeah, I can't think of a reason why this shouldn't work. So that was a big like very sport-like moment if you want to approach it in those terms. And I live for shit like that. When my players catch me with my pants down, I'm always like, well, you did it. Good job.
Sometimes stabbing your friends is the correct solution. Alrighty. So tell us what you think of combat. Do you think combat is sport, war, puzzle, something else? What does combat mean to your games? Go ahead and tell us down below because I would love to hear it.